All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this morning. I apologize for my technical challenges. Let's get started. It is 9 a.m. And let's do, this is a regular meeting of the Washoe County Homeless Advisory Board for May 4th. Roll call. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chair, did you want to do the salute first?
Are you really okay?
It's agenda.
All right, let's do the salute to the flag. I was not in the room, so I didn't know if we were going to do that. So let's do that. So we'll do a salute to the flag. All right. Please join me in a salute to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Doing salutes to the flag are very challenging on these Zoom meetings, but I appreciate everybody hanging in there with us on that. So, Madam Clerk, can I get a roll call, please?
Certainly. Bob Lucy, Chair.
Here.
Marcia Burke-Bigler.
Here.
Neoma Jordan is absent. Oscar Delgado.
Here.
Christopher Dare.
Here.
Ed Lawson.
Here.
And we have our Attorney Assistant DA David Watts-Vial.
Here.
And Nancy Parent, County Clerk. You have a quorum, Mr. Chair, and for the record, everyone is on Zoom.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right, Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment this morning signed in for you that has been submitted to the clerk prior to the meeting or has been issued via this Zoom meeting?
No, sir, we do not.
All right. Is there anybody on the Zoom meeting wishing to speak at this time? All right. Seeing none, we will close public comment, bring it back to the board. We're on to item 4. This is the approval of the minutes of the March 2nd, 2020 meeting. Are there any changes or alterations to the minutes as they've been presented to the board in the packet that would need to be changed at this time?
Approve.
I have a motion and a second.
Mr.
Motion from Councilman Dare, second from Commissioner Burke-Bigler. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. And let the record show that Councilwoman Jardin, Vice Chair Jardin, is with us now.
Just, Mr. Chair, was there a call for public comment on that?
There was.
Then I apologize.
Okay.
There is
All
no
right.
public comment for the record.
Thank you. All right. We are on to item 5. This is an update, discussion, and possible direction regarding a report from the Human Services and Homelessness Services Branch under the Incident Management Team that is led by Julia Ratty, who is with us. Senator, how are you this morning? Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. She has been working with the Incident Management Team and Karina Peters to address the homeless issue during the COVID-19 incident. So with that, I will turn this over to Senator Ratty.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. And just for the benefit of the public, so as to not confuse anybody, I appreciate you using the title Commissioner, but I am not here today in my role as a senator. I'm here today in my role as an employee of the Washoe County Health District. So just wanted to make sure that that was clear for everybody out there. I have been asked in my role as an employee of the Washoe County Health District to facilitate the homeless branch of the IMT. And so I'm here today to give you an update on that work. So as with just about everything having to do with the COVID-19 response, our goal has been to assist with flattening the COVID-19 curve. We've been doing everything that we can to reduce the spread of the COVID-19 infections throughout the homeless population. Our task has been to facilitate efforts to reduce that spread, particularly among people experiencing homelessness. So if we could go to the next slide. Sorry, next slide. So as with much of what we've been doing as a community, our work has been guided by the Centers for Disease Control. They have issued specific guidance. That guidance has come in two forms. And so the first part of that guidance has been work around congregate shelter, our community assistance center properties here in Washoe County. And so if anybody's interested in seeing more in-depth information on that guidance, that's the link. Next slide, please. Generally, that guidance has been to identify overflow shelter to reduce crowding and accomplish social distancing, to provide for isolation for any individuals who test positive, to identify quarantine for symptomatic and individuals who have had contact with positive individuals. And they have also added protective housing for individuals who are experiencing homelessness who are at the highest risks of COVID-19 complications. That is more specifically defined as anybody who is 65 years or older or has an underlying health condition. This is guidance that was added recently. Moving on to the next slide. Additional considerations that the CDC would like us to review is staffing, making sure that we're including training, safety, and planning for absenteeism within congregate shelters, increased cleaning, changes in operations to minimize contact, additional supplies, as you can imagine, and proactive communication with the community and with the individuals who are experiencing homelessness. Next slide. So in addition to those who we are supporting in congregate shelter, there are of course the unsheltered homeless that are living throughout the community. Again, the Centers for Disease Control has issued guidance in that realm as well. And so again, here's the link should you want more information. Next slide. The primary guidance here from the CDC is listed on the slide. It is unless individual housing units are available, do not clear encampments during community spread of COVID-19. Clearing encampments can cause people to disperse throughout the community and break connections with service providers. This increases the potential for infectious disease spread. So this is the primary guidance coming out of the CDC with regard to encampments. Next slide. So the additional considerations is as we are working with folks who are living in encampments, asking them to do everything that we can to encourage social distancing with tents and sleeping quarters, ensuring that there have been restroom facilities and functional water taps, that they have hand hygiene materials, bath tissue, those sorts of support so that they can maintain some on their own some reduce of the spread, and then toilets and hand washing facilities. If they're not available, do the best that you can to provide that support. Moving on. So that's been the guidance from at the federal level from the CDC that the health district has been following. In our own community, this represents the timeline. On March 16th, the Washoe County Health District provided some guidance to the Community Assistance Center relatively early on in the epidemic about how they might take some steps to reduce the spread. On March 18th, we had the closure of non-essential businesses in our community. As you can imagine, with the closure of restaurants and casinos, that pretty immediately tied with the somewhat of a restricting of services at the Community Assistance Center. We ended up in a space where there were an awful lot of folks out there who had very little access to water, to restrooms, to hand washing. Very quickly, this community reacted and opened the Reno Events Center. That gave us, I think, a very high quality response to being able to at least account for the sleeping conditions and to accomplish some good social distancing, a significant improvement from the Community Assistance Center in terms of the ability to space people out and reduce the spread. On the 20th, the team, and when I say we, it is a global we, so this has been a collaborative effort from all of the jurisdictions, the staff, the nonprofits that are involved. So they were able to add screening of individuals. So every evening as folks are entering the Reno Event Center, they are being screened for symptoms. And if they have symptoms, then they are isolated. They're taken back to the Community Assistance Center for isolation. On March 25th, we had our first housing placement of an individual who was exhibiting symptoms. From March 22nd to the 27th, the community also rolled out restrooms and hand sanitizer to 19 locations throughout the community to address more of the CDC piece on encampments and folks who are in the community without access to bathrooms or hand washing. And then on March 29th, we had our first individual who was tested positive. From that point forward, we've been moving towards, we had a really strong, I would say, community immediate and emergency response. And now it gets a bit more challenging of how do you build out a sustainable approach that addresses the public health needs of this particular population. Next slide. So again, the actions to date, the Washoe County Health District provided guidance to all homeless service providers, and we established the branch that I am currently representing. The City of Reno, Volunteers of America, and the RSCVA worked together to very quickly open the Reno Event Center for that socially distanced capacity of 375. Community Health Alliance, a nonprofit partner, and VOA set up the screening and isolation for COVID-19 symptomatic individuals and created a safety plan for the shelter staff. Next slide. All local governments working together through the IMT and the REOC placed the 19 portable restrooms with hand sanitizer throughout the community. The Washoe County Human Services Agency secured a supported housing contract. So this is a housing contract that has an APRN and a caseworker involved. As you can imagine, with this population, having some extra supports for the housing was important. They also set up the housing triage team, which is the team that you're going to hear from next that does all of the housing placement. Our food service providers, Catholic Charities, the Reno Sparks Gospel Mission, the Reno Initiative for Shelter and Equity, all adapted modified food provision. So rather than having folks congregate, they went to more of a to-go model so that we could, again, accomplish social distancing and reduce the spread. Next slide. The Downtown Partnership and the Foundation for Recovery both independently put together communication materials that they were then spreading throughout the community with outreach staff and with the downtown ambassadors. As you can imagine, the normal communication channels, television and radio, and some of the social media and things that we do throughout the community aren't necessarily the most effective in this community. And so lots of just handing out flyers and doing everything we could to educate folks on how to keep themselves safe and what was happening with services in our community. And then the incident management team set up and secured the Edison trailers as an additional isolated housing option. So I hope what you see from that list is the wonderful collaboration that you've seen throughout our community. It has included every agency. It has included staff at every level within every agency. It has included some exceptional nonprofit partners who have really stepped up to the plate. So there's been a lot of activity. Next slide. So that leaves us to the next steps. And again, as I alluded to before, this is a bit more challenging where we need to now plan for a sustainable approach. With regard to COVID-19, until we see either an immunization or the ability to do some sort of antibody testing, which would allow for us to identify people where science has now come to the conclusion that an antibody test has declared makes someone immune, and we are not there yet. We do not have that science to support that assumption. So until we have some changes in the general environment and the situation of the reduced spread of COVID-19, we're really in a position of needing to follow that CDC guidance to the best of our ability as a community moving forward, upwards of 12 months, perhaps a year and a half. We really don't know, but we know that it's not immediate. Until there have been some significant changes, we still will need to practice social distancing, be concerned about spreading COVID-19 through this population. So it's the next steps for the community are working on an exit plan for the Reno Event Center, where we still have some sort of shelter available that accomplishes for social distancing. We have the health and safety of the encampments to work through as a community to support those goals. There are some unique resources, extra resources that have become available through FEMA, the CARES Act, CDBG, and ESG. So it's part of that will be a resource analysis of what resources would be available to support this community, and then a capacity analysis of where do we have beds, where do we have housing units, and in many cases, what would be the staffing level necessary to support a longer term longer term sustainable effort to this. You also should have received a spreadsheet with a handout of our current bed capacity with all of the different options that we have in our community at this time. Just to highlight the challenge when it comes to social distancing at the Community Assistance Center, specifically as we think about an exit plan for Reno Event Center, in the shelter's current capacity. So if you just look at the men's shelter dorm and the women's shelter dorm, those two facilities have 210 rooms available in a normal operations setting. But when you attempt to do social distancing in that space, there are only 52 rooms. So it reduces the capacity of the Community Assistance Center down to a fourth. There is perhaps an opportunity at the CAC to bring the space that's currently occupied by the Good Shepherd Clothes Closet on as well. From a socially distanced standpoint, that would add 44 beds. So if we're looking purely at the CAC and the shelter at Record Street, the maximum socially distanced beds that you can get in that facility is about 96 beds. Our current capacity of folks that we're housing is 410 individuals. So again, it's a little less than a fourth of the capacity. So there's more analysis on that sheet just so folks can understand where the beds are. But the piece that I would like to emphasize on all of that is in our current state with the one large room with 375 individuals able to be housed, the staffing level can be maintained at the current level of the current contract. But if we start going towards strategies of isolating folks in smaller spaces and more separate, then it requires additional staffing. So that's the information that I have for you today. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Julia. We really appreciate all your help and all the work that you've done on this. This has been, I know, a long, long road for you, and you have done a lion's share of the work with this. So thank you for that. Are there any questions for Ms. Ratty at this time?
It is Christopher.
Go ahead.
And amazing work, actually, just watching everything move so quickly and put things together. I mean, obviously, all the same concerns we have is just for the making sure these people have that they're safe and they have what you need. How quickly do you think we're going to try to move out of the event center, or are we just looking at knowing we need to? Is there any timeline that we're trying to do that? I mean, I say that not because I'm trying to rush it. I'm just trying to be concerned about what you just said, the other information you just told us, and how do we walk forward?
So I think where we are today, so first of all, thank you for acknowledging the good work that's been done today. And I really do want to emphasize that I have been purely a facilitator and that all of that good work has come from your staff at the cities and the county and the health district. So just really amazing collaboration across the community on that level. In terms of the next steps, it's the same. I think the way that we're starting to talk about it is that you have the COVID-19 response in one lane. You have your ongoing operations with the development of the Our Place properties, as well as the update of the CAC contract. So your ongoing operations happening in another lane. And in a third lane, you have the work that's just kicking off for Built for Zero to have that long-term strategic approach. And the next step for the community is to a certain level, keep all of those in their separate lanes, but also braid them together to make sure that any decisions that we're making from a COVID-19 lens in terms of keeping people safe from the spread of this terrible virus are also informed by and done in good alignment with the ongoing operations that you're at a critical stage in Our Place and the CAC, as well as the, I think, hope and optimism that comes for our community from the Built for Zero process. And so I think there is no rigid timeline on it that I'm aware of. It lives in the same way that homeless services lives in our community pre-COVID-19, in that each jurisdiction has its own governance process and its own decision making, and then you all come together here as the community or the Community Homeless Advisory Board to make some of those decisions. So there isn't a answer for that, except for that the community will need to continue to work together to solve for that.
Okay, is there any other questions?
Yeah, Bob.
Go ahead, Ed.
Julie, have we tracked any of the homeless population that have COVID-19 at this point?
You broke up just a little bit there, Councilman Lawson, but I believe the question was, do we know how many people have tested positive at this point?
Yeah, and the homeless population in particular.
Great, thank you for the question. So we have been tracking the number of housing placements that have been done for individuals who are homeless. And so I believe Ms. Peters will be able to give you some updated numbers based on the number that have been placed in the next presentation.
All right, Neoma, do you have a question?
I do. I have a question and then, can you hear me? A question and then a statement.
We can hear you, can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay. I don't know. How come that?
There you are.
Oh, okay. I can't see you guys, but that's okay. So my first question is, our place is scheduled to open when, and how many beds would that relieve at the Community Assistance Center?
See that the representatives from Washoe County would be better situated to answer that question. The spreadsheet, so I can say that within the Reno Event Center, there are 80 to 90 women currently staying there. So if we are to move women, that would relieve 80 to 90 spots at the Reno Event Center. In terms of the planning for our place, the county would be a better position to answer that question.
Katrina, do you want to go ahead and answer that question by chance? Katrina Peters is with our Human Services Agency.
If Director Howell is on the line, I think she'd probably be best suited to give an Our Place update. I'm here to share information on our housing triage team, so probably not the best person to speak to an Our Place update.
Mr. Chair, this is Kate. I'd be happy to fill you in on what I know. I'm not sure if Amber is available.
I see Amber on. I see Amber on here, so I'm going to call on Amber. Amber, can you hear me? You've been unmuted.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so thank you for the question. This is Amber Howell. We have two populations of women. There are 50 that reside in the Community Assistance Center throughout the year, and there is anywhere from 30 to 40 individuals that are housed in the overflow site. So what we're doing is taking both of those populations and moving them no later than June 1st over to the Our Place campus. We have purchased modulars to be able to do that. So we don't have a brand new campus and a vendor that would be operating in two locations. So all women that are at the convention center will move to the Our Place campus in modulars. Also practicing social distancing. So we had to purchase 2 of them to be able to be in line with the CDC guidelines. And all of that will happen by June 1st.
So do we kind of have an estimate of how many appropriately spaced beds that would open up for the men at the Community Assistance Center? I'm trying to get the numbers when we exit the Reno Event Center, how many beds we are short.
I think I can answer. This is again Julia Ratty for the record. And so if you look at the Excel spreadsheet that was part of the handouts for this meeting, in the Community Assistance Center, the women's shelter, that women's dorm normally accommodates 50, and in a socially distanced manner, it only accommodates 17. So from freeing up space in the Community Assistance Center, socially distanced space, it only opens up another 17 beds. And as I alluded to before, and if the city of Reno wants to comment, this would be more appropriate for them. That makes it very difficult from a staffing challenge to have smaller populations in these smaller rooms. In terms of opening up space in the Reno Event Center, there are 375 beds currently at the Reno Event Center, and on average, 80 to 90 of those are occupied by women.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. I guess I'm just planning for when that reopens, which that will need to for our businesses to come back. So we got to just plan for that. And I just will make a statement from the city of Reno's perspective, and I know everybody knows this, but it's extremely difficult for Reno to bear the burden on all of this for the Community Assistance Center and the Reno Event Center Reno is handling all the calls for all of those. So a jurisdictional approach and getting some help from our regional partners. We've got to come up with a plan now because Reno cannot bear any more burden on this issue.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I appreciate that. Are there any further comments from the board on this topic? All right. Ms. Peters, do you have anything you would like to add this morning to Ms. Ratty's presentation in regards to the homeless response during COVID-19?
No, I have a couple slides to talk about the work of the housing triage team, but I'm ready to transition to that if that's the will of the group.
I think so.
Great. Good morning. I'm Katrina Peters, Human Services Program Specialist with the Washoe County Human Services Agency. And I prepared some information to give just a basic high-level overview of the team we've put together to receive these housing placement referrals. And first, I really want to start by describing our overall goal, and we've really tried to keep this at the front of our mind through the work that we've put into place, and that's to flatten the COVID-19 curve. I think we can all appreciate how important it is for us to reduce the transmission of that disease throughout our community, and that's really guided the work of what we've termed the housing triage team. Our specific task with this team was to develop and implement a system to place people into housing who are COVID-19 symptomatic, positive, or waiting test results that cannot self-isolate for a variety of reasons. And prior to us establishing this team, and on the next slide, I'll share a timeline, there was really no process or staffing identified to be able to respond to this need. And if folks can appropriately self-isolate, then they're likely to be spreading the disease throughout the community. So really putting a sense of urgency behind this work. Next slide, please. So looking at our timeline, first, kind of really the timing lines up with the timeline Julia already shared as well, but our first meeting was on March 25th. We spent about 6 hours, myself, Julia, and several HSA staff members looking at the current process and where the bottlenecks are, and then mapping out what an ideal process would look like to be able to place people into housing. We spent the next few days really building out that process, building out forms, getting shared email addresses and tracking systems in place. And then on March 30th, the WellCare contract was put into place, and that very same day, we put our first person into that housing resource. So really kind of underscoring the urgency and need for that WellCare contract. On April 2nd, we identified staffing within the Human Services Agency that could be reassigned to work on this team, and we got everybody trained and up and running. So I think to kind of dovetail on what Julia mentioned around our responsive response to this need, in government, a lot of times we catch a lot of heat for not being nimble and not responding to problems in a timely fashion. And I think this timeline really speaks to how quickly we were able to mobilize staff and be able to respond to this really unique and dynamic problem. Since then, we've been doing continued outreach with medical providers and community partners to make sure they understand the criteria and understand the process to be able to submit a referral into housing. Next slide, please.
He was in school yesterday.
So this is a pretty busy slide, but I wanted to be able to share just kind of some basic steps in the process once we've received a referral. And again, in the top right corner, we're looking at that goal statement of being able to flatten that COVID-19 curve and be able to get people placed into housing so they can self-isolate if they're COVID-19 positive. The orange rectangles at kind of the top third of the slide are intended to reflect the groups that we're receiving referrals from. So we're receiving referrals from the hospital ER, we're receiving referrals from hospital discharge. We've also worked with the Community Assistance Center, who are identifying folks who are symptomatic, isolating them, and then working with Community Health Alliance to look at those symptoms and make a determination if they're appropriate for a referral. We're also receiving referrals from the Washoe County Health District Epidemiology team. So when they've identified someone who's positive and can't self-isolate, they're referring that person over to us to place into housing. We have a really short referral form and a consent form that we ask to be completed to be able to initiate a housing placement process. And our housing triage team first walks through a series of questions. And one of those first questions is, can this person safely self-isolate? So again, just making sure that we're receiving people who absolutely can't self-isolate on their own. If they can't, then we're asking more questions to determine any special needs that person may have. We want to make sure we're placing people appropriately and that we can meet the level of care. Right now, we're placing into WellCare. There's a total of 43 beds there. Through that contract, they're providing medical monitoring 3 times a day. They're assisting with medication. There's access to an APRN to help with any medical needs that may pop up as that person's recovering or awaiting test results. There's also been 300 beds identified through the Edison housing. We're currently working to get medical monitoring in place to be able to place people there. And once folks are placed into housing, we're either awaiting a test result. If they're negative, they're then discharged from housing. If they're positive, then we're working with the epidemiology team to keep that person self-isolated until the epidemiology team has deemed them appropriate to be discharged. So again, a busy slide, but wanted to kind of walk through our process. Next slide, please. We've staffed this team with a variety of individuals that are within the Human Services Agency. And to kind of talk through those 2 roles, the first is a housing triage team manager. Frankie Lemus, a behavioral health coordinator with Washoe County Human Services, has been serving in this role and really has done a phenomenal job overseeing the team and making sure we've got staffing in place, and also just responding to any changes in needs around people who are placed, questions from providers, and also making sure we have all the right processes, forms, contact lists in place. Our next role is what we're calling our housing triage team lead. We've been able to tap into some caseworker staff at Human Services that are kind of the air traffic control. They're receiving those referrals, processing and arranging transportation, arranging medication if needed to get that person placed into WellCare in a safe fashion. We've also been working with some HSA support staff to just kind of fill in any needs around case management. Folks can have a lot of anxiety around a COVID-19 diagnosis, and being able to talk to someone through kind of some anxieties around being isolated has been really helpful. Our operational hours are 8 to 5, 7 days a week. So those are the hours that we're receiving those placements and being able to place people into housing when appropriate. Next slide, please. I want to quickly go over the criteria for people that we're placing. So first, the person has to be in need of self-isolation because they're either COVID-19 positive or they're presenting COVID-19 symptoms. They also need to be able to meet the criteria for not being able to self-isolate. This can be for a variety of reasons. Could be multiple roommates, shared bedroom, folks who are in something like a treatment center, or people who are experiencing homelessness. So kind of a variety of scenarios that contribute to someone not being able to self-isolate. They also have to be able to perform their activities of daily living. The WellCare location, they're not able to accommodate someone who needs 24-hour medical care or has some medical equipment needs. So we're doing that screen on the forefront to make sure we're placing appropriately. Next slide, please. I put together some facts on how many referrals we've received, and this is a little bit dated, but to be able to give you kind of state of affairs today, we've received 19 referrals. From that, we've been able to make 17 placements. Those have all been at the WellCare location, and we've currently got 8 people currently housed. For the Edison housing, a property manager, food service, and security have been procured at that location. We're working on additional medical monitoring, and there's been some conversations around further supports that would be needed at that location to be able to place anyone with any special needs. Currently, people with special needs are being placed at WellCare. I believe that concludes my slides, but I'd be happy to take any questions from the group.
Ms. Peters, did you want to answer a question about the number of homeless placed?
Sure. Out of our 17 placements, 12 have been people who are experiencing homelessness.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Peters. We really appreciate it. Are there any other questions for Ms. Peters in regards to the housing plan that has been put together by HSA and the health district in response to the COVID-19? All right, I'm seeing the shaking of heads. Nothing shaking up. Okay, this is an item is for possible action. Is there any public comment, Madam Clerk, that has been said on this?
No, sir.
All right, so no public comment signed in. We can take is there a desire to take a motion on this or just a desire to move to accept the report? I will open it up to the board.
Yeah, Chairman, I'll just make a motion to accept the report.
All right, I have a motion from Councilman Lawson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Vice Chair Jardine. All right, I have a motion from Councilman Lawson, a second from Vice Chair Jardine. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously with all members voting. All right, we are on to item 6. This is a update, discussion, and possible direction regarding the RFQ of the 2020 09 CAC shelter operations. And that closed on April 20th of 2020. And we have members from the city of Reno. I believe City Manager Sabre Newby-Smith is with us. Sabre Newby, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Newby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that Monica Cochran is also on the phone. She was going to be giving that presentation. Monica?
She on the phone. So we don't have the phone. Oh, here she is. Oh, there we got it.
There she is. But she's muted.
She's still muted. Just unmute herself.
The host. No, I'm here.
There she goes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Ooh, that was challenging. Good morning, Monica Cochran, for the record, City of Reno, Housing and Neighborhood Development. This originally was going to be a presentation by possible vendors that submitted proposals for the operations of the CAC, but it's just going to be a brief update instead. The 3 jurisdictions, City of Reno, Washoe County, and City of Sparks staff worked together through December and January to develop an RFQ with measures that we wanted to see, goals reached, things like that. And we released the RFQ in February. It was originally due in March, but due to COVID, we postponed it a few times. And ultimately they were due on April 20th. Staff reviewed them that week, but as you can imagine, due to a variety of variables, including staffing, funding, social distancing, all of the unknowns, we decided to postpone the larger discussion on this item until June, when we have a better idea of how we can move forward. As you heard with the presentation from Ms. Ratty, we have a lot of variables with where to place people and how to place them responsibly with social distancing. So the group decided that we would postpone the larger discussion until the CHAB June meeting. I can answer any questions that you may have, but that is the update that I have right now.
Thank you, Monica. I appreciate that. Are there any questions for Ms. Cochran from the City of Reno in regards to the RFQ? All right.
I have a question.
Okay, Madam Vice Chair, sorry.
Thank you very much. My question is just the clarification. My understanding, we only had one submission for the operations, and that was VOA.
That is correct. We had just the one from VOA.
And the closing for that operator submission, that has passed.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
You know, this is Christopher. I think one of the biggest things that we think we have to make sure, no matter who's in there, and I appreciate them continuing coming back and even stepping up during this time. We have to make sure that we can get the information we need and make sure that is a big part of what we're doing. I know we have gone into Built for Zero and we're doing that. That's going to help. But I just, that's my biggest push, is making sure that we can make decisions that are factual and that we can see the needle move. And I mean, these are human beings and we want to help every one of them. So we want to make sure we know how best to do so, and see that they have to, it's just important that we have that information. So I'm hoping that in the RFQ and what, as these guys step forward, that is a big part of what needs to happen. Thanks.
All right.
A statement to that, if you would like.
Yeah, please.
I just wanted to say, with the 3 jurisdictions working together to develop the RFQ, one of the main things that we worked really hard to include in there was the accountability and desire for metrics, so that we could get that information to you guys.
Chair Lucy, can I ask one more question?
Please.
So if I understand, next month we will have a more robust discussion about that RFQ. Is that what I'm understanding?
That is correct. There's just with right now where we're sitting with social distancing and being at the event center and how that's going to look going forward. There was just some deeper analysis that needed to be done, and watching to see what happens with the governor opening the state and things like that before we can make a better recommendation of how to move forward.
Okay, and thank you. And I appreciate that. And I think allocating the appropriate amount of time, I mean, just looking over it, it's about $2.5 million over budget. So we're going to need to go line by line and figure out how that gets handled. That's a significant increase, or certainly over budget, that I think all of us can agree our jurisdictions simply don't have.
And I think the vice chair brings up a really good point at this point in regards to how we approach homelessness from a broader discussion. I think this pandemic has brought us to a unique spot through forcing us to change operations and how we've had to maneuver to allow for social distancing, proper sanitation, and those types of issues. One thing that I think we've forgotten in this community going forward is that those CACs and those homeless shelters have always been, the intent was for them to be emergent shelter, not long-term housing, not even short-term housing, but emergent shelter for those who needed a place to stay, to get them off of the streets and get them a warm meal and a safe housing. We've now worked with a number of developers and community agencies to bring on a number of different types of housing projects online for these individuals, and still yet are not being able to transition those individuals out of our emergent housing situation and into more of a short-term or transitional housing. I think I would implore this board and all of our boards to start really taking a harder look at how we address homelessness within our region. We cannot allow people, even whether it's a vendor such as BOA to take over the CAC or whoever that is, to allow this continual long-term life and housing at the CAC. But at the same time, not continuing to try to move them out of encampments that are plaguing our downtown, both of our downtown cores, our river, and throughout the region. We need to start figuring out ways to move these individuals off of the river, out of the CAC and emergent housing, and into truly transitional housing as a region, and figure out how we do that with a provider going forward. I think that's going to be what we need to do comprehensively if we're ever going to really approach this in a sound manner, and so that our costs don't continue to go up with these service providers such as BOA, such as RISE, such as a number of different individuals out there that would deal with this. Their costs are going to ever grow as long as we allow this continual placement at our emergent centers. So that would be my discussion as we look on the RFQ in the months to come, how we address that. And and really setting forth policy regional wide, working with the health district, working with Human Services Agency to address this. All right. Any other discussions or comments on the RFQ before we move forward? All right, seeing none. Is there any public comment on this, Madam Clerk?
No, sir.
All right, seeing no public comment, we will close that. Do we need, I don't think we need an item. I'm not gonna, there's no reason for a motion at this time, so I'm not gonna look for one. So we'll close item 6 and move on. Thank you, Ms. Cochran. We appreciate your participation today and giving us that update. All right, we are on to item 7. This is board member announcements, reports, updates to include future board agenda items. Anything anybody would like to add this morning in regards to future agendas or what they'd like to add in regards to what's going on?
Chair.
Okay, Madam Commissioner Burke-Biggler first, and I'll go to you right next.
Okay, I don't know that June 1st is going to be soon enough for us to really get a grasp of how much this, the homeless population is being impacted by the fact that we have downsized jobs and there's so many people out of work and where we're at on this. So, but at some point in time, when we're down the road maybe, and we get a better handle on exactly what we're looking like as we return to business, we're going to have to address the issue of how many people end up homeless because of this. I mean, we're going to have to address what we're going to do with them, not the issue, but what we're going to do with them because of the situation. I guess the thing that concerns me is if for instance, when we go back into the phases as we're phasing in restaurants, if only 50%, let's say, of the former seating that could be in the restaurant is now in the restaurant, how is that going to impact employment? And I know this is a great big picture, but it's an issue that concerns me as it relates to homeless and where we're going to go. And so I put that out there. As I said, I think June is probably too soon to start talking about that, but I'd like to have it on the slate of things that our staff are looking at as we start moving forward on this. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Dare.
Yeah, just looking at our river and thinking of from Tumwa's standpoint and water and things, you know, if there's ever a time that we probably need to find a place where we say, if you're camping, that's where you camp, this is how you do it, have guidelines, we probably need to move a little quicker on that if it's possible, or as things happen and potentially get more difficult, we're going to find ourselves in a place that is a really bad place. I mean, we're already probably struggling. I mean, I've not been down there because we all been quarantined and things, but I can say that it's going to get worse before it gets better in that sense. And it probably really needs to be addressed in a manner. And I'm not saying this is forever, but in the situation, if this is going to linger and this isn't going away quickly, I think that is something very, very important to look at, is the possibility.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. Any other discussions? Vice Chair Jordan.
Thank you very much. And following up on Commissioner Dare's comments, I too agree that, and Commissioner Burke-Biggler's, that waiting till June 1 may be a little too late. I do think maybe a mid-May convening of this board would be good to discuss precisely that. And also to Commissioner Burke-Biggler's point, tracking those that have fallen into a homeless situation due to COVID, I think is really critical. In the event we get some federal funding, some reimbursement of some sort, having those numbers may be beneficial so that we can recoup some of the dollars that are being spent to house and all the support services that are being provided. So I don't know how that gets accomplished. I don't know if those entering our shelter environment are being asked if COVID contributed to their being homeless. I don't know what that looks like, but I do think that's kind of important for reimbursement purposes. Funding is critical to all of us. And to Councilmember Dare's point, I too have concerns very much about the increase in encampments from a public safety and health standpoint, there's an increase in fires, there's an increase in feces and drug paraphernalia, which is, the encampments are beginning to cluster in a fashion that leads me to believe that it may be defeating the COVID guidelines from the CDC because they're clustering, and what kind of health risks are they being subject to there. So again, back to my point, maybe in mid-May we can talk about another location for a large tent, something. I don't know if it's on the Governor's Bowl site. I don't know if it's on the Mill Street site next to the trailers. I don't know, but we're going to have to come up with something. And I know that Commissioner Ratty I know everybody's working hard to figure this out, but I haven't heard where what we're pushing as the potential resolution to this issue. In other words, is it a large tent at a site? What is that site? How is the staffing? But we have to put some urgency to that. We need to get our downtown back open and our homeless taken care of. So I would ask for a mid-May meeting if we could do so.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair, Councilman Lawson, Councilman Delgado.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it. And maybe as part of that, and thank you to everyone's your comments around this. I too, I'm thinking about this quite a bit, but also thinking from the perspective on for those folks that are on the brink of homelessness. So any thought around a lot of our experts out there, of course, any thoughts about how we're going to properly, or at least assume the assessment of the evaluation of many of our community members in terms of where they would go to present if in need. I know Julie Ratty in her slides talked about the different resources that may become available in terms of care, CDBG, as all the different pieces. But where can people go to have and understand and better understand if they can receive those resources? I think are going to be vital versus just having to go to the CAC. So I'm just hoping that we could think geographically as to where people may be able to go to find these resources, whether it be our community resource center or something, but inform our community where they can go to get that assistance before they become homelessness, where they can go for maybe some of that rental assistance, or can they go for the food, or can they go for any of those other pieces. I think we may be doing that, but I think we can do a better job of informing the general community.
Just, excuse me, Councilman Delgado, we're having a terrible time hearing you here in the caucus room. So maybe that last couple of sentences, if you could restate that, we could catch it.
Yeah, so in the summary form, just the next presentation, if you guys can come with some ideas, or if there's some ideas that can come about how do we prevent people from being homelessness, assuming that the people are going to have some hard times, where they can go and get those resources versus just saying they can just go to the CAC, but just geographically thinking, North Valleys, anywhere. I'm sure there's a few locations at Sparks, just geographically, and so people don't always just have to go to two different points in terms of how they can be assessed or evaluated to keep them from being homeless.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I agree with Oscar. I think we need to start developing, instead of being we've been very reactionary to the problem for years. I think sometimes more of a proactive response, like Oscar's talking, or Councilman Delgado's talking about, in regards to prevention. How do we provide resources, providing those people who might be on the brink? How do we get those resources properly distributed throughout the region, north, south, east, west, to make sure those individuals don't have to travel all the way to a downtown to get to the CAC for that assistance, or one of our facilities. Let's make maybe some satellite sites throughout the community that would provide maybe that, if we have that opportunity through some of our regional buildings. And to Vice Chair Jardin's discussion, I know Manager Brown has submitted a letter to our delegation for this next funding package for the fourth package of the CARES Act that would address some of these community and county and city challenges as it pertains to funding for these types of recovery efforts. I know he sent that letter out last week and addressed that to all of the delegation for the state of Nevada, and also the speakers of both houses. So I think we're going to work diligently with our federal staff to continue to see if there's funding available. Yesterday, I worked through the weekend with the LEAP team. We submitted every county's checklist to the governor's office last night at 5 p.m. That was submitted, so we'll hopefully hear some response from them in regards to where we go into these next phases and how this recovery will look for us. We are actively involved with those discussions. And I think Commissioner Burke-Bigler is right. We don't know exactly what they'll accept or what they're going to look for in regards to how we employ individuals going forward, whether warehousing jobs, restaurant jobs, frontline workers, those will all be changed based upon safety restrictions, but we just don't know what the governor is going to accept at this point. And so when we have these discussions, I think everything's kind of up in the air, and I think probably a mid-May is not a bad idea to talk about prevention, talk about what we're going to do in response, and hopefully by the 15th, in a couple of weeks, we'll have a better understanding of where we are and what the economy is looking like and how soon maybe our casinos would be back open. Well, a couple things I wanted to provide an update for. We did not do the Built for Zero. I see you both, so I'll grab you in a second. We obviously pushed the Built for Zero presentation back due to the COVID-19 response. Obviously there's so many uncertainties right now with the regional response to homelessness. That doesn't say that there's any exception for us to continue to delay it. It's just been very challenging with how to maneuver basically baseline responses. So we will get the Built for Zero on as soon as we possibly can. But we're trying to address how Built for Zero now will be approached now with the social distancing, the increase in those maybe who might be experiencing homelessness. That'll also come along with a transition plan and the opening for Our Place, which will hopefully happen on May 15th for the families. And then, as Amber Howell pointed out, by June 1st, for the women. We have to continue to talk about the transition to the CAC for the men and what we're going to do going forward, and how we have solutions for all levels and transitional housing for those individuals. So I think as we move into that, those will be some of the next updates that we'll provide for you in some of these future meetings. But we'll get that to you as soon as we have more detail for you. I know, Ed, you've raised your hand. You had something to add?
Yeah, I think that we have to keep in mind too that when we do go back to normal, when the governor opens up the economy again, that moratorium on rents and whatnot gets lifted. So I'm looking for a surge in homelessness to go hand in hand with that also. So, especially if you've sheltered in place for the last 2 months and possibly 3 months, that might be a hole that's too big for somebody to dig out of. And that could be the one contributing factor to them becoming homeless. So we need to be looking at that spike in the population, a month after we go back.
So I agree with you. So what we'll do is we'll put if we schedule a mid-May meeting, we'll make that as an agenda item for kind of more of a robust discussion. Neoma?
Thank you very much. And actually, to that point, it kind of puts more of an urgency and an emphasis on additional emergency shelter opportunities for those coming out of the Reno Event Center, maybe those in the parks or along the river. We're not going to probably have all the resolution of long-term or even midterm housing resolved by then. And the emergency shelter opportunities are going to have to be stood up. And so I would just ask if we can start looking. It's always about the where. Where would we put a large tent and how would we staff it so that we could adequately provide emergency shelter and adequate spacing. And I know the governor's bowl has been discussed, but then NDOT gives pushback on that. I know that we talked about NAMS. I don't know if there's opportunities there. I don't know the Mill Street. I just know if we don't start pushing as an emergency on this issue now, and we're going to be here June 1 and been wishing we had.
Agreed. All right. Councilman Dare.
Just my only question is, we might really want to also make sure that we are squeezing everything we can out of the federal government. And what I mean by that is making sure, I mean, I know our city is looking for stuff, but just making sure there has to be some finances that are somehow looking at what we're talking about right here, that we might need to handhold a little bit and help people connect to it. But I know that there are some funds to help people through some of this. They just don't know how to do it. So sometimes it's not necessary that we always have to come up with the money, but some people just don't know how to do or walk the thing to get the finances and the help. So that might be an avenue, but there's no way we're going to all have the finances to do it.
No, and so what I propose is that we put together an item for if we hold a mid-May meeting, that we kind of cover all of the potential emergency responses, from grants to prevention to housing to reliance on the state to identifying campgrounds if need be, or alternative locations. I think what we'll do is I'll work with staff, with Kate, to wrap that into an item and an agenda and somehow try to craft a discussion based around that. And then we can bring that back to really address it mid-May about how we move into the summer and how we move into what is the new normal for that. Does that sound okay with everybody for a discussion level? Okay, I'm getting nods from everybody, so yes. All right, so, all right, is there any other announcements or reports for anybody that'd like to add today for this discussion? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close this item. We're moving on to item 8. This is items for possible consideration for the June 1st, 2020 agenda. As of right now, we have Ben Castro coming. He's the executive director of RISE to provide us a presentation on the forward movement with Our Place and what they will be doing there. And then we also have a discussion and possible direction brought forward by the district attorney's office in regards to the Martin versus Boise City case that pertains to camping, and sleeping locations for individuals, and how we enforce that, and how maybe we need to look at some different ways creatively to work with these populations to move them to areas without getting ourselves into legal predicaments. So those two things will be coming on the June agenda. Is there anything else that anybody would like to speak outside of the issues that we've already brought up in regards to maybe some of emergency responses in a mid-May meeting? Okay, going once, twice, no shaking of heads, nothing. Okay, seeing nothing. All right, good, fine. Fine with me, we won't add it. All right, 8, so we will bring that back to you. I will be in contact with, I'll be working with staff. We will get in contact with everyone for to have a meeting. We'll try to schedule that at some point, and then also work towards the June meeting with the managers and make sure that's up to date. Madam Clerk, we're on to our final public comment of the agenda. This is item 9, final open public comment. Is there anything that's been submitted?
We don't have anything, sir.
Thank you. All right, seeing no public comment. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. We appreciate it from zooming in from wherever you are. Be safe, be careful, take care of yourself, and we will be in touch soon, I certainly.
Time out.
What? What?
What do we have?
Jay Colbert Clausel.
We have Jay Colbert Clausel on Zoom for public comment, sir.
Oh, okay. My apologies. Mr. Clausel, the floor is yours, sir. We have you unmuted. You have 3 minutes.
All right, thank you very much, and no worries on the apology. We haven't invented technology yet. It's kind of my opinion of it. It's something that we're all working on, and so we're doing our best with it. And thank you for hanging in there. So I'm Jay Colbert Clausel for the record, and speaking for the Reno Initiative for Shelter and Equality. Quoting our executive director, Ben Castro, "Please build housing and put us out of business. Open zoning to new mobile home parks, prefab construction, converted hotel rooms, and low-cost solutions so that the private sector can help relieve the housing shortage. In addition, there is still a demand for Safe Camp. Police are still doing sweeps in parks and private land because there is no structured place for people to be. This is costly and increasing tensions. It places emergency service providers like police, our outreach workers, and unhoused people at risk. And I'd like to add, one tent will not be enough, and the tent is a costly option without opportunities to move people into longer-term housing. RISE has a plan and experience and can present that plan. If you'd like that at your next meeting, as we were originally scheduled at the beginning of the year or the end, just let us know. Thank you.
Thank you, so. All right, it's Madam Clerk, I'm going to try this one last time. I know we have some delay. Is there any other further public comment?
We aren't seeing anyone on Zoom, sir.
Okay, going once, twice, three. Okay, we're closed. All right, closing public comment. We are adjourned. Everybody be safe. Talk to you soon. Thank you.